Hallo, ich habe heute die Chance, mit Darin Gaub, ehemaligen Oberstleutnant der US-Armee und Helikopterpilot, zu sprechen. Wir sprechen über seine Meinung, was nun weiter passieren wird mit den Friedensverhandlungen USA, Ukraine und Russland, inwieweit die Ankündigungen von Donald Trump, amerikanische Militärbasen von Deutschland nach Osteuropa zu verlegen, stattfinden sollte, könnte und inwieweit das auch das Machtvakuum oder die Machtbalance in Europa mit Russland verändern könnte. Und ja, bleibt dran und hört dem Experten zu, der ja jahrelang in der US-Armee gedient hat und auch Militärexperte ist und uns nun einen Einblick in die Strategien geben kann, wie es denn ausschauen könnte mit Europa und der Ukraine. And thank you for being on this interview with me. You have seen this incredible Oval Office press conference with President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and President Zelensky. And it was really famous and it went viral all over the world. So, what was your opinion about this interview?
Hey, Vicky, it's always good to see you. And thanks for inviting me along. From this side of the pond, I guess you could say it wasn't really surprising that Zelensky acted like that. He's gotten quite used to being the star of the show, everything from being on the front lines wearing the right gear to a Vogue photo shoot to coming to DC and getting to appear in front of Congress and begging for money and all this kind of stuff. So to kind of be held accountable finally, it was an expected reaction from him. Maybe not necessarily in the Oval Office, but that was a reaction that I personally expected him to do something like that at some point, because even he admitted that well over half of the funds they'd received they couldn't even account for. So I think this is the beginning of making sure that that Zelensky, Ukraine in general, this cannot be a never-ending war that continues to take money out of the United States and harm our readiness, harm our economy, and do so many things. But and most importantly, not perpetuate a war that doesn't seem to have a strategic end state of any kind that makes any sense. We're just killing people, but for what? Let's stop the killing for now, and then we can move towards what is next. We've made good steps, but Zelensky needs to realize that if he's not going to make steps towards peace, then we're not going to keep fueling this conflict.
And then we heard that Donald Trump even said that Zelensky is not willing to do any steps forward to peace because he said he doesn't want to say yes to the minerals deal. And then you have the European Union and the UK who's saying, oh, we stand behind Zelensky. We are even thinking about sending troops to the Ukraine and help the Ukrainian army to fight the Russians. And then on the other hand, which is very important for us because this is a show for a German audience, we heard about Trump thinking about relocating very important American army and American military bases from Germany, maybe to Poland or maybe to Hungary. And you told me that you are very familiar with those bases. So can you tell me about your opinion? What kind of, is this more like a poker thing? Like, oh, he's saying stuff to make maybe Germany say, oh, we have to go back a little bit? Or do you think he's very serious about it?
Well, I mean, it could be both. And that's kind of like the lawyer answer. But starting off with the beginning of your statement there, first of all, the continued growth and expansion of NATO towards the east is a large part of what fueled Russia and their reaction to what we were doing. And that goes back to the early 90s with the initial expansion, then phase two expansions, early 2000s, and then you know, NATO actually operating like an offensive force in the Balkans, then Afghanistan, Russia. Just from the perspective of Russia, they see NATO as an offensive force that is encroaching on its borders and its sphere of influence. So we can't just keep pushing Russia and saying, yeah, we're going to push NATO into a security buffer between Ukraine and Russia. I don't think Russia's going to be too favorable to that. There may be somebody else they would allow there, but NATO, I don't see that coming. But if you flip that and you go back to that conversation about moving American forces out of Germany and into Poland, Hungary, and other nations where I've actually ran U.S. military task forces, which would be Latvia, Bulgaria, Romania, even down into Turkey, which is acting strangely as a NATO member right now. There's a legitimacy to that if you divorce yourself from the politics of us moving more U.S. military and therefore NATO forces into places like Poland and closer to Russia, from a perspective of military capabilities and training and access to land, those kinds of things, that makes sense. What I saw in Germany was an area that was so restrictive from an environmental standpoint, not only just the use of fuel, the use of ammunition, but noise, tank treads, and farmland and things like that, to the point where you really couldn't do much. So, the kind of training I was able to do in places like Poland and Latvia is much more extensive than what you could do in a place like Germany. So there's a point where that does make sense militarily and readiness wise. The risk is, of course, moving U.S. forces closer to the Russian boundary. And maybe that's part of the conversation that needs to happen between Russia, the U.S., Ukraine, Europe in general, when it comes to European security concerns and Russia and stopping this war in Ukraine.
Yeah, but don't you think that with pulling out of troops out of Germany is kind of a playing with fire? Because Germany is a very important base in Europe because it's the door to the west and to the east, and you should not really giving up this very important type of area when you are thinking coming from America, having a huge ocean between. So it would actually make sense to keep some of the bases in Germany.
Yeah, and I'm Ramstein Air Force Base. That's one of those things that'd be like, yeah, if you have the capability and Germany wants it to stay there, you definitely should keep it there. That is a strategic air base. So when I'm talking about moving potential forces into Eastern Europe, I'm talking from the perspective primarily of what does it gain, and
Yeah,
if it gains the ability to train like armor, artillery, army aviation, infantry, that kind of stuff,
like
then
that's what the Grafenwöhr is, for example.
like yeah, but much bigger than Grafenberg.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe that makes sense, and I can see doing that. But to say that necessarily you're going to move U.S. Air Force assets out of Ramstein Air Base, that's much more debatable. I guess I don't know that you'd want to do that because the relationships that are already there, the importance of the air base itself, and moving it from where it is in Germany all the way out to Poland, now you're impacting some things that everything from fuel and part. There's a number of things that I'd be concerned about there because I've seen the airbase that they'd be using in Poland, and it needs a lot of work. Um, so I don't necessarily think that. I think there's a kind of a hybrid answer there, which is if it increases our readiness and our ability to train, I can see where it makes sense. But there's also this quasi political and strategic basing answer that is hey, the best place for some of these assets is still in Germany. And that's a leverage point that, sure, you can talk to Germany about and say, hey, if you don't want to fund your own defense, okay, we're going to move a lot of our ground forces out of Germany into Eastern Europe. However, we also have Ramstein Air Base that we'd like to keep there. So we don't necessarily evacuate in total. We don't want to do that either.
Oh. So, and then from your experience, what do you think would be the next steps? What Trump and Vance want to do with Ukraine? Do you think they're going to start again? Because we heard about they have some new debates in the Middle East with Russia and Ukraine about peace contracts. But what do you think? How would they look like now? Because we saw Zelensky being very disappointed how the last press conference went over and how they treated him. And then
Mm.
now you have a new debate in the Middle East. So what do you think? What are the goals for America right now? What they want to achieve?
Well, I think the first and most blinding goal right now is to get Russia to agree to the 30-day ceasefire. Because if you can just simply pause everything, everybody stay where they are. Nobody do anything else other than just stay where you are. That in and of itself is a huge win. Instead of losing thousands of people potentially a day in conflict, we can stop that part right away, and then we can proceed with the actual negotiations and getting down into the details without having Ukraine launching hundreds of drones against Moscow and Russia launching hundreds of drones and missiles and things against Ukraine. So if we can just stop that, bring everybody to the table and have everything relatively stable to get to the point where there's maybe something to sign in the future, that's a win. The second thing would be, well, let's take NATO off the table. Russia will never accept that. Don't even bring it up. There's no point to it. That's part of the reason why we're even here. Let's talk about the economic ties. And that's really what I like what Trump is doing is let's take the weapons of war out of this. The artillery, the machine guns, the rifles and tanks, and let's get into forging economic alliances that frankly can build up everybody. And maybe in the future, you could actually draw a Russia more towards Western Europe again and less towards China, as we have been doing. And that would be good for everybody as well. So I think that's the big solution is what economic ties are forged between Ukraine, the United States, Europe, that allow Ukraine to rebuild economically, rebuild its country, and maybe even rebuild a military. But I do think we have to be realistic that Ukraine should not go in expecting that all original boundaries are going to go back to where they were. Russia will also not accept that. So both sides are going to be unhappy with the complete solution. Both sides will be happy with many of the negotiating stances that they've taken, that they're going to get some of that, what they wanted. But in the end, the people who pay the price are the ones that we need to focus on and say, you know what, let's just, again, stop people from killing each other over what is really, frankly, at this point, nothing, no strategy, no end state, no purpose.
And then you have Germany, which is right now increasing the economy in building military machinery. They're talking about tomorrow in the Bundestag to changing the constitution to make it happen to even get more credits or pay more money for increasing building tanks and the machinery for military increasing tools. So and that's against our constitution to make more debts. But what do you think would Russia think about it when they hear, Germany is now in that mindset, are we just gonna increase our military, what we didn't do since decades, because we had these boundaries, but now we don't even care about the boundaries. We just gonna build up. And then you have Trump on the other side who said what you said. We just have to focus on economy and getting back to the status quo where nobody kills each other. So what do you think? Is this a deal breaker for Russia, or do you think Germany is not that important?
Well, Germany really still remains the heartbeat of Europe. I don't think anybody would really truly argue that between them and, frankly, the United Kingdom. You're talking about some powerhouses that need to have a big part at the table. Now, I understand the desire to increase self-defense and do certainly encourage that because the best offense is a great defense, right? But there's a balance between that and sending the message that we're going to create this massively weaponized European continent again that, again, reminds you sort of a pre-World War I era where everybody's on edge and it wouldn't take much to light that on fire. So I'm definitely not arguing that it's wrong to do that. I think it's the right thing to do for nations to invest in their own self-defense and not rely on anybody else. But you have to balance that with the right kind of people dealing with foreign policy in other nations that say, hey, let's do things for the good of all. America first doesn't mean Germany last, right? I mean, the people of Germany, their leadership should consider their people first and foremost, just like a president of the United States should consider Americans first and foremost. And then you come to the table and you figure out what you can do as part of a deal is concerned. So let's acknowledge the risk of increasing defense expenditures, but not let that stop the process. And let's get wiser when it comes to diplomacy and economics in creating the kind of ties that are good for everybody, rather than looking at everybody constantly through an adversarial lens and seeing who shoots first.
So, das war das Interview mit Darin Gaub und ich hoffe, ihr konntet ein bisschen was davon mitnehmen und eine Idee finden, wie es nun weitergehen könnte mit den USA und der Ukraine und Russland. Und natürlich hoffen wir, dass am Ende wir alle eine friedliche Lösung bekommen können und wie Darin gesagt hat, dass wir erstmal den Status quo von einem Waffenstillstand haben, um einfach das Töten auf beiden Seiten stoppen zu können. Und ob es wirklich sehr nützlich ist und zielführend ist, dass jetzt ein Wettrüsten in Europa stattfindet und Deutschland sogar die Verfassung ändern möchte, um mehr Schulden machen zu können, um das Militär weiter aufzubauen. Ich selber finde es gut, dass man das Militär aufbaut, aber wir hätten das eigentlich schon Jahrzehnte früher machen sollen und nicht einfach nun zu vermeiden, ein falsches Signal an Russland zu senden und dann vielleicht doch eher was herauszukitzeln und hervorzubeschwören, was wir alle dann am Ende bereuen, was sich dann vielleicht sogar in einen dritten Weltkrieg entwickeln könnte. Aber lasst uns einfach sehen, was die Zukunft bringt und wir alle hoffen natürlich, dass es dann zumindest zu einem Waffenstillstand kommt. Dann danke fürs Zuhören und bis zum nächsten Mal. Eure US-Korrespondentin Vicky Richter für den Deutschland-Kurier.